Oftentimes the day of the Lord will be like this, and he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, for example, in 586 BC. Or the day of the Lord might refer to, as the Apostle Paul talks about it, and in the books of 1st, 2nd Thessalonians, will be at the end of the age, when Jesus Christ returns. So anyway, there in the book, the day of the Lord is a common theme in the little book of Joel. There are no historical references in Joel, so it is not known when he ministered. Because of some internal reasons, some scholars believe Amos picked up on Joel's prophecy. Last time I was here, we started on this side. Let's start over here with Terry and Judy. Some people believe that Amos picked up on what Joel wrote. So Joel, Judy, would you look up Joel 3:16? And Terry, would you look up Amos 1:2? And Dan, you got your lap full. We'll go ahead with Dan Hannon. Dan Hannon, would you look up Joel 3:18? And Tom, would you look up Amos 9:13? All right. Judy, if you'd read Joel 3:16 for us. And just in case anybody, go to the book of Daniel, then it's Hosea, Joel. So it's kind of an obscure book. I mean, we know when it's quoted in the New Testament, we'll recognize some of the quotes, but it's in a sense sort of an obscure book.
So Joel 3:16.
Yeah.
The Lord will roar from Zion, and thunder from Jerusalem, and the earth and the sky will tremble, but the Lord will be a refuge for his people, a stronghold for the people of Israel.
Okay, Terry, would you look up Amos 1:2 then and read that for us?
He said, "The Lord roars from Zion and thunders from Jerusalem. The pastures of the shepherds dry up, and the top of Carmel withers."
All right, so notice there particularly, and the Lord roars from Zion is mentioned in both those texts. The next one, he utters his voice from Jerusalem, the heavens, the earth tremble. The other one says, as from Jerusalem, he utters his voice, and the shepherd's pastures grounds mourn, and the summit of Carmel dries up. So you have the same kind of imagery here. God is looked at as sort of like a lion who, when he speaks, he creates cataclysmic events. All right. Then we can do the same thing with the book of Joel 3:18. Dan, you want to look that up?
Joel 3:18.
Yes.
And in that day, the mountains will drip with sweet wine, and the hills will flow with milk, and all the brooks of Judah will flow with water. And the spring will go out from the house of the Lord to the water the valley of Shittim.
Okay, Tom, would you take the Amos 9:13 passage?
Behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that the plowman shall overtake the reaper, the treader of grapes him that soweth seed, and the mountains shall drop sweet wine, and all the hills shall melt.
Okay, so notice again the idea of sweet wine flowing with milk. You're going to have the plowman overtaking the reaper. In other words, when it says the plowman will, well, let me ask you, somebody tell us. When he says the plowman will overtake the reaper, what does that imply? Well, sort of. In a broad sense, the idea that God is going to provide abundance of goodness. Very good. I'd give you a star. If I had my whiteboard up here, you get a star. You have a star in my heart, okay? And we all have a star in our heart now. But you're absolutely right. That's exactly what it's saying. The harvest is going to be so plentiful that the plowmen are going to be right behind, hurry up. and get this over with, because it's an abundance. You see, both these are kingdom passages referring to the time of abundance and plenty and God's presence and the judgment of evil where there is no more evil, and people will be content in God's providential care. So that's what's going on here. So anyway, people think then that Amos may have picked up on Joel's prophecy. But it's kind of hard to say. It might be the other way around because we don't know when Joel ministered. Since Amos, however, ministered in the days of Uzziah, which is around 760 BC, then perhaps Joel ministered around 800 BC, somewhere toward the end of 1 Kings or the beginning of 2 Kings. However, Joel also shows similarities to things in Zephaniah. So let's go ahead here. Anybody want to look up, Melanie, we didn't let you have a chance here. So if you want to look up Joel 2:2, let me see. Let's go back then. Doug, would you look up Zephaniah 1:15? Let me find these as well. I don't even have them yet. What did I say here? Yeah, Joel. Yeah, I'm looking for my place in my notes. Yeah, Joel 2:2. Melanie, if you have that, would you read that, please?
A day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness, as the dawn is spread over the mountains, so there is a great and mighty people. There has never been anything like it, nor will there be again after it, to the years of many generations.
Okay, so here it's a picture of impending judgment. And God's going to overwhelm the land with destruction. All right, how about the Zephaniah passage?
A day of wrath and sad day, a day of distress and anguish, a day of ruin and devastation, a day of darkness and gloom, a day of clouds and thick darkness. See
that? Gloom, clouds, thick darkness. The idea is, again, the same. And you can also compare Joel 2:10. Let's see. Carolyn, would you look up Joel 2:10? Carmen, would you look up Isaiah 13:10? Okay, go ahead, Carolyn.
Before them the earth shakes and the sky trembles. The sun and the moon are darkened, and the stars no longer shine.
All right, Isaiah 13:10.
For the stars of the heavens and the constellations will not give their light. The sun will be dark and its rising, and the moon will not shed its light.
All right, so you notice there again, the moon, the stars, the sun, all these things, there's going to be some sort of, at least on the surface, a cosmic upheaval where the natural laws of light and sunrise, all that sort of stuff is going to be affected. Now, we're going to talk about how literal we are to take those things in just a little bit. But one thing you have to keep in mind as well, there are certain, I'm sure, we can say, well, this person depended upon this person, and this person may have read this person's prophecy, which is certainly true. They were certainly aware. Some of these people were contemporaries, as we've already noted. So they know what each other's saying. They're probably getting together over cups of coffee at the local Starbucks or whatever, and they're talking things over. There was a school of the prophets, so they probably went to seminary, as it were. So there were certain stock phrases that they would use. So it's not necessarily, hey, Amos is looking at Joel, vice versa, and says, you know what, that's pretty cool. I think I'm going to say that in my next prophecy. Well, if there might be some of that, but remember, if God is not inspiring them and saying to them, "Thus saith the Lord," it's not a prophecy. In the sense that God sends them to speak. Obviously there's a prophetic role, even if God does not directly tell you what to say. I have a prophetic role. We all have a prophetic role because we're saying, "Thus saith the Lord." But there's some of that as well. I'm sure that they are familiar with one another. For example, there are in a sense stock phrases within Christianity, and they're not bad, they're not good. It's just the way we speak. For example, you talk about a church that sends out missionaries or is missionary minded. It's a missional church. There's no such thing as missional in the Bible necessarily, but it's just it's a stock phrase that everybody knows what you're talking about, and everybody knows and understands what you're saying. There are other things as well that words that we use so that people understand where we're coming from, what we're trying to attempt to do. And of course, some of those words come right out of the Bible. We talk about Jesus' redemption. We talk about the church's kingdom oriented, right? But just because one person uses the same phrase as another doesn't mean that they're necessarily copying each other. It's just part of the locus, or not the locus, but the vocabulary that they use. So anyway, Joel's message, ultimately dating Joel is conjecture. We don't know. There's no date given. Now, Joel's message is directed toward the southern kingdom and is made up of two or more or less equal parts. In the first section, chapter 1 through chapter 2, verse 17, we find that Joel describes a locust plague. And he says this locust plague is like an army advancing over the nation. And so if you just want to just very quickly, the word of the Lord came to Joel, the son of Pethuel. Hear this, O elders, listen to this, inhabitants of the land. Something's going to happen that has never happened before. You've never seen it. Your fathers never saw it. Tell your sons about it. What the gnawing locust has left, the swarming locust has eaten, verse 4 says. And what the swarming locust has left, the creeping locust has eaten. And what the creeping locust has left, the stripping locust has eaten. Awake, drunkards, and weep, and wail, all you wine drinkers, on account of the sweet wine that is cut off from your mouth. Now notice, interesting, I just noticed this. Didn't hit me until just this very second. He says, you're going to lose all your sweet wine. This judgment is going to bring a destruction of your grape harvest. What did we just read a little bit ago? That in the kingdom, the mountains are going to flow with sweet wine. God's going to reverse that judgment. So at the beginning of the book, this is what's going to happen to you. But at the end of the age, this is what's going to happen to you. So that's always part of these prophets. Virtually every prophet will talk about judgment, 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 judgment. But then at the end of the prophecy, maybe it's only half a chapter, maybe it's the entire chapter, but we read that God's blessing will be upon you, the kingdom will rise. Malachi is classic in this regard. And it's a very short little book. We'll get to it when we get there. But in Malachi, there's this constant, you're worshiping me in a false way. You're not giving me your tithes. You're going through unjust divorces. Your sacrifices are meaningless. Your worship is perfunctory. But at the end of the age, the sun will rise with healing in its wings, and the calf, and people will go forth in joy like calves skipping from the stalls. You have those kinds of things virtually in every prophetic work. So, and if it's not at the end of the book, it's at least throughout, because at the end of the book of Isaiah, he talks about smiting the world with a curse, but all throughout chapters, particularly chapters 40 through 66, you find a mixture of judgment and future blessing. Anyhow, so let's go on here. Straight toward the southern kingdom, you have this idea of a locust plague. It's likened to an army in chapter 2. Let's turn to chapter 2. We read some of this already. Sue, would you read just read down through verse 5. Read verse 1 through 5. Joel 2, 1 through 5.
Blow a trumpet in Zion and sound an